again, at a range, some written by students and some written by IELTS experts. Now, it's best to start with the new books. That means 16 and 15 and 14, and go back, because some of the older books, the questions are a little out of date. Some websites also that might be useful to you. The first two, especially if you want to find out more about the test format and get some sample questions. Of course, there's the British Council website and IELTS.org. I'll give you the exact link for the band descriptors from IELTS.org later. After that, we have a few useful blogs. I'm sure many of you have been to IELTS Simon already. You know that IELTS Simon is not updating his website anymore. However, there's a lot of past writing that he's done on that site that you can still access, at least at this point. Then you have Dominic Cole, who has DC IELTS, another very good source. Now, I think those two sources are better for higher bands like 7 and 8. If your bands are maybe more 5 or 6, one of the other sites like IELTS Academic or IELTS Buddy might be more suitable for you, because the explanation is a little simpler and the formats that I use are easier, but still very effective. Again, IELTSblog.com has lots of samples from academic and general training, task 1 and task 2, maybe thousands of samples on there for you to read. And it's good to read lots of samples to become familiar with the common topics and also to get ideas for your own essay, because many of the questions will later be recycled into new questions, but you can use the same vocabulary and ideas. My next tip for you as writers is you need to learn how to engineer your essay. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. It doesn't mean you need to be an engineer yourself. I don't want to learn to be an engineer. But the way an engineer learns how to make a complicated machine like this engine is not by just looking at the outside. Instead, they take the machine apart and look at each piece. What does it do and how does it fit together? So they take it all apart and then they try to put it back together to understand what's happening. You can do the same thing with an IELTS essay. If you look at a Band 9 sample from an IELTS expert, it may seem like you can never do that. But it's not a Band 9 essay because I wrote it or a native speaker wrote it. It's a Band 9 essay because it does specific things well. And those specific things are the check boxes in the band descriptors. Now, one way to learn how to engineer an essay is by doing what I call a flipped essay. Let me explain. Normally, you would read the question or in the table and then try to write an answer for yourself. But since you have sample answers, you can look at the sample answer first and then try to draw the table. That teaches you a lot about selecting the most important information. And that's one question that I get a lot from students. Which information is important to include and which can I omit or leave out? So let's do a little practice with that now. If you have a piece of paper or a notebook and a pen, please take them out now. And I would like you to draw a chart that looks like this. It's blank, and we will draw a line. Going up, we have 1, 2, 3 million barrels of oil. And at the bottom, we have the months of the year. So January, February, March, April, all the way to December. So you can write the letters J, F, M, A, or you can write 1, 2, 3, 4, and up to 12 for the months. It's up to you. Now, I want to describe just one line for you from this graph, and you will try to draw it. I will repeat each sentence twice for you to hear and check. The best thing to do is listen for the month and the number and draw one small dot or point at that month and number, and then connect the lines at the end. Okay, I hope everyone is ready. Again, I will read each sentence 2 times. Oil imports rose sharply to peak at 2 million barrels a day in early April. Oil imports rose sharply to peak at 2 million barrels a day in early April. Next sentence. They then steadily fell back to 1.5 million, but suddenly rocketed in September, reaching a new peak of 2.5 million in late October. They then steadily fell back to 1.5 million, but suddenly rocketed in September, reaching a new peak of 2.5 million in late October. Next sentence. The figure then fell again, but from November onwards stabilized at just under 2 million. The figure then fell again, but from November onwards stabilized at just under 2 million. Let me read all the sentences one more time. Oil imports rose sharply to peak at 2 million barrels a day in early April. They then steadily fell back to 1.5 million, but suddenly rocketed in September, reaching a new peak of 2.5 million in late October. The figure then fell again, but from November onwards stabilized at just under 2 million. Okay, you can connect the lines now. And if you were able to listen correctly, it should look something like this. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but approximately that line. If you had difficulty with that exercise, maybe you need to practice listening skills, or maybe you don't know enough about the language of describing trends. So I'll type that keyword into the chat box for you. In terms of describing trends or describing changes over time. You can study more about that topic for task 1. Okay, my next tip to you as a writer is to have a game plan. As I said, you don't want to have any surprises on test day. You should know exactly what you are going to do. So, like a sports team practicing for a competition, they think about what they are going to do, and they do it again and again and again until they feel confident and that they can do it perfectly during the match. Similarly, you need to know exactly what the steps you're going to do when you write. So let's think about writing overall first. There are 2 writing tasks, and you have 1 hour to complete both of them. Task 1 is 150 words minimum, and this is worth 33% of your score, or 1/3. Now, a mistake that many students make, especially when they get a difficult question, is to spend too long on task 1. Maybe they spend 25 or 30 minutes for task 1, and they don't have enough time to finish task 2. Remember that task 2 is longer, 250 words minimum, and it's worth more of your score, 67%. That means that both task 1 and task 2 are averaged together and rounded down. So if you get 7 all the way across, of course your score is a 7. But if your average is 6.93, you still get band 6.5, even though you're very close to a 7. So you really need to be careful to do both tasks well. Okay, task 1, writing first. Again, here's our process. We have a before, during, and after. We're going to spend 3 minutes before we start to write. to think carefully about the question and to think about what grammar and tenses we need to use. Of course, we need to think about the key information. What are the significant features of that graph? And we should also make a note of any synonyms that we can use so that we show a range of vocabulary and we don't repeat the words in the question. And then the biggest thing is the overview. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. However, I suggest that before you start writing, you make a note of your overview, because your overview is the key to your essay in general. It tells you what you're going to write about and how to organize your body paragraphs to be more coherent. So if we've done those first three things well, it shouldn't be a problem to use 15 minutes to write 150 words. That's only 10 words every minute. But a lot of students forget to use their time at the end, or to leave time at the end for editing your essay. Anyone will make mistakes if you're trying to write on a time limit, including myself. When I write IELTS essays, I always make grammar and spelling mistakes. If you don't go back and correct them, then of course you will lose points. So let's think about next the types of charts or diagrams we can get for task 1. I'm sure you're all familiar with line graphs, bar charts, pie charts, tables. Then we have multiple graphics, and you can see it's a combination of two different kinds of charts. In this case, I have a short table at the top, and then below I have two pie charts. I want to spend one body paragraph for each of those. Then we have maps, and there are two different types of maps. There's a map at one time where you have 3 locations, A, B, and C, to talk about, and then there's a map over time, like this one. This is Stopford in 2 different years, 1930 and 2010, and you need to talk about the changes. And then most students hate process. I think process is probably the easiest one, except that students get too nervous about it. Actually, all you need to do is follow the arrows in the process. The most difficult part will be coming up with synonyms around that topic. So you might not know a synonym for cows grazing, but it doesn't always have to be more difficult. It can be easier too, like cows eating grass is also a very appropriate synonym. Now, the next question that I often get from students, do I need to study all of those different types of charts? And of course the answer is yes, because the question you get on the exam will be random. Just because your friend got a table last week doesn't mean you get a table this week. And you even have different questions from other people in the same exam room, so you cannot cheat. The good news is that there's only a few things you can do. And in fact, the first 4 that I mentioned, tables, pie charts, bar charts, and line graphs, are all the same information in a different form. That means that this line graph started as a table, and this bar chart was also a table, and this pie chart is also a table. So you can use the same format and language to talk about them. But what happens when you get something that looks like this? And you say, I don't know what to do. It doesn't look like any of the things you told me before. So that's my question for you. What kind of writing is this? Well, I want to encourage you that there are only 3 different things you can do for an unusual topic. You can compare data, like in a table or a pie chart. You can compare locations on a map, or you can describe a process. It's always going to be one of those 3 things. Now, for compare data and compare locations, You also need to decide if you have more than one time. So is it static or dynamic? But let's think about those three things for these three bridges. Should I compare data and numbers, compare locations, or describe a process? I want to get your answers in the chat window now. Let's see. I agree it's a bit of a tricky question, but just take a guess. Look at those bridges. What would you do? Again, I just want 1, 2, or 3. Compare numbers or data, compare locations on a map, or describe a process. You choose. I have 3 different answers already. The first 3 are 1, 3, and 2. Okay, it's interesting. I got a lot of 3s. Lots of 2s and 3s. I think we're about 50-50 saying 50% are saying 2, 50% are saying 3. Almost no one is saying number 1. Okay, very interesting. Let's turn back to these bridges now, and I want to guide you through a process of thinking about them. Thank you for your answers. Okay, so a lot of people said 3, describe a process. If it's a process, we need to think, is one thing changing into or becoming another thing? So let's ask ourselves this question. Is the first bridge changing into the second bridge and then changing into the third bridge? Is the bridge growing? Well, no. So it's not 3 because these are 3 different bridges. Okay, so it's not 3, sorry. Now we have question number 2. Is it a map? So do I have a north, south, east, and west? Or do I have a top, a bottom, a left, and a right? Well, I definitely don't have a north, south, east, and west. Up, down, left, and right, maybe. But it's also not a map, even though a bridge is something you get on a map. In fact, the answer is number 1. So if it's compare numbers or data, you need to think, can I put the information into a table? And here I've put the information into a table. So what am I comparing? I'm comparing the type of water the bridge goes over. You can see lake, river, sea. I'm comparing the type of ships that it can go under. And I'm comparing how long and how high each bridge is. When I think about the information in a table, then I can write my answer like a table or a line chart. So the answer is number 1. Let's give one more practice to an unusual topic. A lot of students have been asking me about horses. These horses. So what am I going to do? Again, 1, 2, or 3. Type your answer in the chat window. Looks like a lot of people are saying 3. Now, this is even more tricky than or difficult than the first one. I can understand why many people want to say 3, because remember my question, is one thing becoming another thing? And this animal is changing and becoming another animal. So that's okay. We can talk about it like a process if we want to. However, I think the correct answer is number 1, describe and compare data. And you think, well, how can that be? Because I have to look at the pictures and decide what the data is, something similar to the bridges. So notice I can talk about the size of the tail on the animal, and I can talk about the size of the head, and I can talk about the changes in the feet of each animal. The horse, of course, has a one solid hoof. I can talk about how much hair the animal has and how tall it is. So all of those can be different columns in a table. So I think this again is compare numbers or data, except that we don't have many numbers. We just have a lot of data in the form of pictures. But if you want to describe it as a process, I think you could also do that, as long as you're comparing the different parts of the horse. Okay, I know that's a bit tricky, but don't be surprised if you get something that looks unusual. Just keep in mind, you can only do those 3 things. Okay, moving on to common problems for Vietnamese speakers. The first is similar to speaking, not knowing about the marking criteria. So 4 criteria, some of them are similar. We have grammatical range and accuracy and lexical resource. We've talked about coherence, and here they also talk about cohesion. So coherence is the logic and the order. Cohesion is the linking words. And then we have task achievement. So let me ask you, and stop sharing for a moment. I'll jump back into the chat window. One more question for you. Task achievement. What things do I need to do to get a good task achievement score? If you think you know, type your answer into the chat window now. There are maybe 3 things that I need to do. Just tell me 1 or 2. Actually, we've mentioned all of them so far. Okay, good. Queen, you're on the right track. Address the requirements. I agree. More specifically, though. Yes, what 2 or 3 things do I need to do to get a good score for task achievement in task 1? I agree that one of those things should be to answer the right question. Answer the question correctly. Don't answer a different question. What else? This is a bit of a difficult question if you haven't thought about it much, but if you want to get a good score, you need to think more about this to do all of the things. Because task achievement is the one category that a lot of students get a lower score on. And there are a few reasons for that. Okay, let me tell you what they are. You do need to answer the question correctly. You need to write at least 150 words. Remember, that's a requirement. Next, you need to select the correct information and the most important information from the chart. Many students struggle with that. And then the last thing is you need to write a clear overview. All right, let me go over that again. 150 words, select the most important features or trends, and write an overview. So let's look into that a little more. Again, you can download the public band descriptors. I'm going to give those to you in just a moment, I promise. And don't let me forget to do that. I'll copy the link in for everyone. Okay. One of the things I just mentioned was an overview. An overview is the general statement of the most important features of the graph. You must have one of these, and you must write it well. So usually we put this in the introduction. When I write task 1, I always put it as the second sentence of my introduction. My first sentence is a paraphrase of the question. Second sentence is the overview. And then I make a new paragraph and I start writing my first body. Now, if you don't have a clear overview, the maximum score you can get for task achievement is a 5. And I will tell you that many students get band 5 for task achievement because they didn't have a good overview. You can see it here in the band descriptors highlighted. Band 5, no clear overview. Band 6 presents an overview with information that's okay. And then band 7, 8, and 9 will have a clear overview. Also look at band 5 again. You'll see this mechanically. I'm going to talk about that again in a moment. So for band 5, mechanical and no overview. Let's only talk about overviews for now. Let's do some practice together. Again, if you have paper and pen, it's very helpful. I want us to try to write an overview of this bar chart. This is UK telephone calls between 1995 and 2002. And we have 3 categories: local, national, international, and mobile. And they are in order. So the first bar in every year is local. The next one is national and international. And the last one is mobile. So it's easy for you. Now, let me give you a hint to write an overview. Let's think about the biggest number and the smallest number and how to compare them. And let's think about the trends, what's going up and what's going down, and compare those. Maybe a minute or a minute and a half, to write an overview for yourself of this graph. Okay, before I ask for any volunteers, let me show you what a lot of students do wrong. They just say a sentence like, overall, there were many significant changes in the figures. That sentence can be about any graph. It's not specific to this topic. So that's band 5 or below. Now, let me get your ideas. Are there any very confident and brave volunteers who want to try to read their overview to us and let me comment on it? If yes, please raise your hand and Huyen will help to unmute your microphone.
So we have a Quỳnh Trang. I will unmute her now.
It's okay. You unmuted me last time.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, so my overview is overall, local fixed lines was the most popular throughout the period. National and international fixed lines and mobiles at call
Huyen, do we have any
share the
volunteers
same.
yet?
Yeah, I unmute Chang already, so I thought that you called.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear Chang? Yeah, I can hear
Sorry,
Chang.
maybe we've lost Huyen for a moment. If you want to volunteer, would you please type your answer into the chat window now?
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Huyen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
I'm sorry, Huyen, I turned off my speakers by accident.
I see.
I can hear you again. Sorry about that.
Okay. Because Chang raised her hand and I thought that she wants to speak for all of us to hear. But
Oh, is that right? Yeah, can we hear from Chang? That'd be great.
Yeah. Chang, so can you speak again, please?
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that, Chang. Go
Okay,
ahead.
perfect. So my overview is overall local fixed line was the most popular throughout the period. National and international fixed line and mobiles share the same increasing pattern. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, very good. I think you got most of it correct. Now, let's think about how we can make it just a little bit better. So, Chang, I think that was a good try, and I think probably a lot of people are in that general vicinity with you. So here's like a band 6 example, something like what you did. I'll let everyone read that for just a moment. Okay, now Chang also pointed out that local fixed line are the most popular and the other two increased during the period. I think that the only part that you're missing, Chang, is the fact that local fixed line increased during the first half and then went down during the second half. So let me show you what a full, clear overview looks like. Again, take a moment to read for yourself. Now, let me see if I can point out some, where is it, by the way? Let me see if I can point out some things to you in this graph. All right. So you can see that we have a complex sentence because it starts with the word although. All right. So the first part of our sentence ends at 2002, and then we have a new sentence starting with the gap. So because it has two parts, it's a complex sentence. Next, we have important vocabulary like the gap, narrowed for became smaller, considerably as an adverb, and the second half of the period. Notice, I don't always have to say exactly the numbers because the second I can divide this graph in half and I have 4 years before and 4 years after. So this second half of the period is 1999 to 2002. Very good. Now, something else important happens when you do that. Notice, in the first half, all of the categories are increasing. But in the second half, national and international and mobiles are increasing, but local fixed line is going down. So, Chang and everyone else out there, did you see what happened? I'm comparing both the biggest number local to the other ones, but I'm also talking about the difference in the trends. So both numbers and trends. If you can do all of that and do it with the right grammar, then you can write a clear overview. It's not an easy thing to do, I agree. In fact, what I always recommend to students is that if you're starting to write task 1, don't write 150 words. Look at a question and write one sentence. Write the overview only for every question that you see, and do that many, many times until you get very good at understanding the logic of the question. And there is always a very easy logic to each of these. So if I'm teaching IELTS, I'll spend weeks and lesson after lesson just giving questions to students and having them write the overview. Do the same thing when you're practicing your self-study. What about overviews for maps? Well, here you just need to point out the most important changes. So the most significant changes to the town of Stokeford were the elimination of farmland and the expansion of its residential areas. You can see that here. Farmland are the cows, and here there's no farmland. And these little boxes are houses, and here we have lots of houses. For process, you just need to count the arrows, but then you try to group the steps in a logical way. So overall, there were 7 key steps in the production of milk. Now, here's where I need to start grouping. Let me get my pen again. So I start with the collection of the raw material, which is this one, right? And then I move on to the industrial part. So I take it to the factory. And then I have distribution here at the end. So that, again, can be a difficult part for students to try to find words to describe the phases. But don't worry too much about that. Just, if you don't have the exact word, just try to describe what you mean. Now, most task 1 will deal with past time. However, sometimes we have a future prediction. So we have 2 different tenses that we need to use. Remember, I told you need to start by thinking about the time periods and the tenses first. Now, if we don't know when the future starts, we can draw a line at today. Today is 2021. Before today is the past. After today is the future. Sometimes the question will tell you, if it tells you 2008, then draw your line at 2008 instead. Now, you can use will or going to talk about the future, but you should also try to use a prediction phrase like one of these: expected, predicted, forecast, projected, anticipated. And it should be in the passive voice. So car sales are expected to increase, or oil imports are predicted to plummet. Always in that passive form. Next, remember I talked about students being too mechanical at band 5 for task achievement. If I look at a chart like this that has a lot of numbers, it's very easy and normal to just want to talk about all of the numbers. Natural gas increased from 38.8 to 54.4, and coal went from 29.3 to 23.7, and 11.1 to 3.4, and 11.9 to 15.9. And suddenly it gets very confusing because there are too many numbers to talk about, and you sound too much like a computer or an Excel file. Here's an example of that. Take a moment to read this sentence. Now, there's nothing wrong with it. The grammar is correct. The numbers are correct, but I don't have any description of why the numbers are important to know. I just have the numbers. Now, here's the real version of this paragraph. Take a moment again to read. Now, the sentences in blue describe why the numbers are important to know. So they've been added for effect. For example, why do I need to know about 54.4%? Well, because it's the dominant means, or the largest number, right? Why do I need to know about nuclear power? Because it's the third biggest number, and it also increased just like natural gas. So I call those kinds of sentences description. Reporting is talking about the numbers, and description is describing why the numbers are important. In order to have a good task one, you need to combine both types of sentences together. So look for that the next time you read a task one sample. And in fact, I have a sample of this essay that I'll give you the link to later. Let's skip that for now. Now, a rather small thing, but it can affect your score, is to be careful with units and numbers. You'll notice here on the left, we have minutes in billions from our bar chart before. But if you're a student of English grammar, you know that we don't use an S on the end of billion or thousand or million. We only use it when we're doing tables and charts. So you need to remember to remove the S when you write it in a sentence. For example, in 1995, the duration of mobile calls stood at around 35 billion minutes. No, 35 billion minutes. Next, also don't forget the unit, which a lot of students do. It's not 70 minutes, it's 70 billion minutes, right? Remember, this is for all of the UK. One more thing to notice, look at these words like around 70 billion minutes. Is it okay if I don't give the exact number, maybe 72.346 billion minutes? Actually, it's better. IELTS doesn't need you to be perfect with your numbers. And it also gives you a chance to show your range of grammar and vocabulary by using words that approximate numbers. So you can see a few different ways to do that for above or below or around. For above, I can say a little bit over or just over, a little more than. Below, I can say nearly or almost. That's good language for you to make a note of, or you can research more if you want to. Also, when it comes to units and numbers, be careful with money. So which of these is correct? 1, 2, 3, or 4? If you think you know, type in the chat window now. Let me check out what answers we have so far. Most people are saying 3, a couple 1s. All right. Most people 3. Well, 3 is the closest, and I don't mean to be mean to any of you, but none of these are correct. There's a mistake in every one. A lot of students in Vietnam make the first mistake. They put the comma instead of the period. Well, that's obviously wrong. It should be a period. But do you notice the mistake in number 3? There's an extra space between the $sign and the number 1. In the actual answer, there should be no space right next to each other. So even small things like that can affect your score. Another small thing that might affect your score, again, is copying incorrectly from the graph. In this case, Each of the words in the key here, recycling, incineration, underground, start with a big letter or a capital letter. But these are common nouns. So when we write them in the middle of the sentence, we should use a small letter only. A small r or a small I, a small u. Only certain words, proper nouns, get big letters, such as the names of countries, Vietnam, China, South Africa, the names of cities like Hanoi, names of companies like Google or Facebook, and the names of languages. Also remember that you should use synonyms whenever possible. So instead of recycling, say reusing or using again. Incineration can be burning, underground can be burying, etc. Okay, let's move on to task 2. Again, we need to think about our game plan. So what steps will you take with your time? You have 40 minutes recommended. I recommend 5 different steps. First, 2 minutes to read the question and think about synonyms for the key words. Next, generate ideas, that is, brainstorm. And don't worry too much if your ideas are right or wrong, or if they're good or bad. Just put down anything that comes into your mind at this point. A lot of students do that, but not many students organize their paragraphs. Remember, we need to have coherence and cohesion, which means that we need to have a logical order. Some students, they start writing immediately, and they'll write about main point number 1 and main point number 2, and then come back to main point number 1, and then they go to main point number 3, and main point number 4, and then back to main point number 3. So it's always jumping around in a circle rather than moving in a straight line. So it's very important that you take as much time to organize as you did to create ideas. It also gives you a chance to make your ideas a little bit better, or to extend them with examples. Again, if we set up our essay correctly, 30 minutes should be a lot of time to write. Again, just 250 words, so this time less than 10 words a minute. And we also want to leave time to edit our essay, at least 2 minutes at the end. So there are the 5 steps for you. Make sure that when you're practicing IELTS essays in a timed 40-minute practice, that you follow those steps in order, so that when you do, if you do it enough on test day, it will be very natural for you. Okay, let's go through the process a little bit more in detail. As I said, 2 minutes to read the question. A lot of students answer the wrong question. So think about the topic and the question. Almost all IELTS essays have one sentence that is the topic. In this case, many cities face major problems regarding traffic jams. And then one sentence as a question. What causes these problems? But notice that this one has 2 questions. What causes these problems, and how do these traffic problems affect individuals and society? In order to get a high score, you must answer both questions. Many people just answer one question and their score is reduced. Now, think about some synonyms. Traffic jams could be blocked roads, individuals can be citizens, society can be authorities or policymakers. Feel free to just write the synonyms next to the word on the question. Next, I want to brainstorm or generate ideas. So you can create a table like this one, or perhaps a mind map or spider diagram. I always use spider diagram because it's more comfortable for me. It's really up to you. No one will look at your brainstorming. More important is that you organize it. So in this case, I have a problem and solution essay. So the P is problem and the S is solution. And the numbers are the order that I want to put them in. Problem number 1 and problem number 2. And I'll also have some other explanation or example that I relate to each of these problems. Solution, again, is my solution. And again, the way you choose to organize it or label it doesn't matter as long as you can keep track of what you've done. Next, I recommend that you always use a template every time, whether it's your practice or on exam day. A lot of students think they need to use an original format every time they write an exam. That's not true. Every time I write task number 2, I always use the same format. If you go to IELTS Simon, he always uses the same format. Why? Because you don't get any points for being creative or being original. You only get points for using your language well. So if you don't have to think about the format, you can spend more time to think about your grammar and vocabulary. Here's an example of a template for an introduction, my template. I have 3 sentences, almost always. First is a broad statement of the topic. Generally, what is the topic? Healthcare, education, environment. Next, I have a narrow restatement of the prompt. And then I have a thesis statement, which is, what am I going to write about? Let me show you. So the fields of medicine and medical technology are always being updated. That's a very general statement. It doesn't tell me anything specific about the question. I save that for the second sentence. In contrast to this, many people think that healthcare is going to be in danger in the near future. So that's the question. And then I have my thesis statement. This essay will outline some reasons for this and propose a solution. So it's very simple. You don't need to have a very complicated introduction. In fact, I recommend don't focus too much attention on the introduction or conclusion. Focus most of your time and your care on your body paragraphs. That's much more important. Now, I said it's important to read the question carefully because many students answer the wrong question. And if you read enough samples, you will become familiar with the different question types. For example, you should know that this question, the words missing are agree or disagree. But notice that do you agree or disagree is a different question than to what extent do you agree or disagree. Extent means how much. So I completely agree or I strongly agree. You must use one of those words to answer this question correctly. Also be careful, as I said, about questions with, a topic with 2 different questions. So this one has, in what ways has technology affected the relationships people make? And has this become a positive or negative development? Now, think to yourself about each of these questions, and let's divide them into 2 different categories. First is state a position. The next is give an analysis. So, in state a position, I want to know about your opinion. What do you think? For the analysis or discussion, you're only going to talk about the topic generally, and you don't include yourself. For example, number 1, to what extent do you agree or disagree? Well, that's you, right? So it's opinion. I want to know what you think. What about number 2? Do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Again, you have to decide. That is opinion. Next, discuss both these views and give your opinion. That's a combination. So I need to give a discussion without my opinion, and I need to give my opinion at the end. Number 4, what are the causes of this and what measures can be taken to solve this problem? That is only analysis or discussion. And last, is this a positive or negative development? I want to know your opinion. So just like we talked about the 3 different things you can do for task 1, think about the 2 different things you can do for task 2. Give your opinion or state an analysis. Now, a lot of students are not clear with their position. Remember the word ambiguous that I used before, which means unclear. For example, if you use one of those idioms like every coin has 2 sides, that's very non-specific. Or the government needs to take action on this issue. What government and which action do you want them to take? Try to be as specific as possible with your responses. One way to be more specific is to give lots of examples. You can see that the question tells you that. Include any relevant examples from your own knowledge or experiences. So you don't need to do a lot of research, but if you know some statistics or some data about this topic, you can use it. Or as I said, you can lie, you can invent your own statistic. However, don't invent knowledge that is obviously untrue. So the sky is green. Everyone knows it's not. Cats have 7 legs. No. According to a UN survey, 99% of IELTS examiners are geniuses. How can that be true? Now, if you change it and say, according to a British Council survey, 4.2% of IELTS examiners are geniuses, that sounds okay. Is it true? I don't know. But I used good grammar and it's logical. The British Council might take a survey of IELTS examiners' IQs. I don't know. The point being that if you can create a realistic or good sounding fake example, that's okay. If you can't do it, then don't do it. Now, how do examples fit into our template? Here's my template for my body paragraph. I always start with the transition from the introduction. That helps my cohesion. Next, I have a main point number 1. Then I have 1 sentence of explanation and 1 sentence of example. So my first main point will have 3 sentences. Main point number 2, explanation or example, 2 sentences. And then if I need more words, I will have a main point number 3. Notice my main points go in order from most important down to least important. It's not most important because it's the best idea. It's most important because I have the most to say about that. I have an explanation and an example. Maybe main point number 3, I don't have much to say. I just want to include that idea. As I said, try to be as specific as possible with your examples. So let's do some inking again on this one. You can see that in the first sentence, income growth has become GDP growth. Again, developing countries, which ones? Specifically, Vietnam. Improving of living standards. Now, I'm going to be specific. Infrastructure. And I want to give specific examples of infrastructure, like Ho Chi Minh Highway or Vinh Thuy Bridge. Oops. So you can see how the second sentence is much more concrete or specific than the first. Now, you can use examples from your own life, but I recommend that you don't use examples from you personally or your family. If the example is about income growth, you can talk about what your community has done, like improving the roads or building more schools or bridges. That's okay. but don't try to talk about your grandmother or grandfather's experience if you can. Okay, speaking of cohesion, let's think about linking words. So you'll see highlighted a number of different linking words. Don't worry, the rest of it is not in English. It's in Latin, another language. I just want to point out one thing about these linking words. They're all used correctly, but they're all quite simple and they're used in the same way. They're all at the beginning of the sentence. Now, what can you do to avoid very simple linking words? Well, you take the mechanical linking words on the left and you change them to less common linking words on the right. Remember, if I want to get a high score, I need to show the examiner that I can do something that's different from the average student. So this is a good screen for you to make a note of or take a screenshot. I'll leave it up for just a moment. And next time you write, try using the words on the right instead of the words on the left. Instead of using however, use in contrast or on the contrary. Instead of in conclusion, use to sum up. If you read enough IELTS samples, you'll find other less common linking words. Feel free to practice using those. Again, if you practice enough, it will be very easy and natural for you to do in your test. And as I mentioned, linking words don't always have to come at the beginning of the sentence. They can be used after the subject. For example, strict punishments, here is my subject, comma, linking word, comma. Again, that is my subject pronoun, comma, linking word. That, however, is not a viable solution to the problem. And if you really want to be very advanced, you can use them between the helping verb, can, and the main verb, like help. This solution can, in addition, help with public health. Actually, I've never seen any students use it that way in Vietnam. I would be impressed if I did. Now, sometimes you're going to need to talk about the future, especially when it's a cause and effect or a solution essay, because you need to think about, well, what can we do differently, the next generation, for example. But no one knows what the future is going to be, so you need to have language that says, I don't know 100%, but I'm maybe 80 or 90% sure. So we call these modals of speculation or modals of possibility. Let me write that in the chat window for you now. We don't have time during this webinar to talk a lot about that, so you can do some more research for yourself. But let me give you a couple of examples. It seems quite likely that Earth's freshwater resources will continue to be depleted in the coming decades. So it seems quite likely says maybe 70 or 80% sure. Again, there is a high probability that cars will run on renewable forms of energy. I don't know exactly, but I think that maybe I'm 85 or 90% sure of that statement. So research more about these types of modals and start using them for yourself when you write about the future. Okay, my last tip for you, don't write too much. Remember, you must write 150 words minimum. If you write less, you will lose points, but you don't get any extra points for writing more. I often see sample essays from Vietnamese websites that have 350 or 400 words for task 2. That's too much. Never write that much. There are many reasons why. Your score will probably go down. One is that you can't link all of those ideas together well, because it's very difficult to do in a short time. Even myself, I don't think I can write 400 words in 40 minutes. So you might take longer and not have enough time to edit the mistakes you've made. And of course, if you write 300 or 400 words, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So 250 words is okay, 260, maybe even 270, but never 300 or more. Same for task 1. 150, 160 is okay. Don't write less, but don't write more. Okay, I did make the last part a little bit fast, but it's because I'm looking forward to your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing for now. And before we get started with the questions, I have a couple links that I do want to share with you. So let me grab those for you now. The first link is, let's see, is an IELTS.org link. This is about the test format. If you still don't know much about the format, as I said, it's very important to become familiar with that. So read up on that. Here is a link for the band descriptors or the marking criteria from IELTS.org. If you want a lot of good exam tips, check out this website from the British Council. It has tips about all of the 4 exams: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. And if you want the sample essays from today, so the one about the pie charts and the horses and the bridges, I posted that to my Facebook for you to find. The only thing on my Facebook account are sample essays. There's nothing about my last vacation or anything. But you can find all the sample essays from this lecture there. Okay, so now it's time for your questions, if you have them. So please, I guess maybe they raise their hand first and then you can unmute.
Yes.
Or you can type your question into the chat box. You can choose.
Okay.
I see a few hands already.
Yeah. Bây giờ chúng mình sẽ đến phần đặt câu hỏi cho thầy các bạn nhé. Cô thấy có 2 bạn giơ tay nên cô sẽ bật mic cho Như Quỳnh và Quỳnh Trang. Đầu tiên là Như Quỳnh nhé. Hi Quỳnh, so you can talk now.
I have a question like this. Should there be linking words for almost every sentence? Or would it be better for the ideas to connect themselves without the need to use linking words too much?
Yeah, that's Chang. Sorry, what is your name? Queen?
Quỳnh.
Như Quỳnh.
Queen, that is an excellent question. It's and a very important one. I actually, if you go to my Facebook page, I'm going to post something about that that relates to the horses. Remember the horses, that unusual topic that I mentioned before, and how I achieve cohesion without linking words. So you can probably already know that the best way to have cohesion is not to use linking words, or not to use them too much. For students at a lower level, maybe 5,